So the earlier session when we first started this morning was a bit more of the constraints. Now I'd really like to focus on why Vietnam has got such a promise and such an opportunity for everybody in the room as we look ahead at what's happening at some of those longer term trends. So first of all, a recap on some key numbers. So 94 million people, 94 million producing $240 billion economy now, and we grew, as you probably all know, about 7% over 17 in 2018. So our GDP per capita is now $2,500 US. The internet economy, which isn't just online shopping, I'll talk about it in a little bit more detail as we go through. It's many things, but is now $9 billion contributing to that economy. So it's about 4%. Retail sales last year reached 145 billion, and they grew 12%. And Zhang talked about earlier how the online shopping market had grown at double that rate. Zalo, 72 million users. They claim a lot more, but in terms of active use of Zalo, 72 million. In terms of active use of Facebook, 64.4 million. Internet penetration, nearly 70% nationally. 85% smartphone penetration national, urban and rural. Nearly 3 billion spent on advertising. Whilst it's a picture of a mobile phone, I mean all advertising, including television, including outdoor, including online and mobile. Last year, 600 cars sold a day, every day. And 88,000 new apartments sold last year just in 3 cities. So I don't have numbers outside of those cities, but Savills can probably help you with that. And of the population who are adults, 45% today are banked, i.e. they have a bank account. So they're the key numbers of where we are today and where the country's sitting. And I'm going to look at some of the success factors, and I'm going to talk about some of these issues one by one as we go through. First of all, we have great political stability. We don't have Mr. Orangehead, and we don't have a rocket man leading the country. So this is the only comment I will ever make on politics. We are extraordinarily stable, and we have leadership that manages the global geopolitics extraordinarily well. We are also a country full of nationalists, so we're very strong in terms of our national pride, and even at the next level down, our city pride or our province pride, which are good things. We talked about urbanization and how rural had stopped growing and was in decline. The flip side of that, of course, is the opposite, which is urbanization. And hence the traffic jam you had in getting here, hence the pollution you suffer every day as this city has grown dramatically to its current size. Our infrastructure is stressed. However, our living conditions are changing and changing rapidly. So we're living in smaller space per person. We tend to be moving from nyareng to freehold housing to apartments. We're seeing a rise in the need for convenience to avoid traffic, and because of the concentration of people, it makes scalable economic sense. The rise in online shopping is being talked about, and the rise in delivery and ride-hailing services. All fundamentally made largely possible because of that urbanization and the concentration of people. If you go to District 4 is the second most densely populated place in the world. You'd have to be in Dhaka, Bangladesh, to get more heavily populated. It's just that district, but it is quite staggering. For those of you who know Cimigo, we used to have an office on the Win Hu Can, and 2 years ago, there were 15,000 apartments opened on Win Hu Can in 1 year. 15,000 new apartments came live, so we moved. We're now on Dien Bien Phu. I'm not sure it's that much better, but there's now, I think, 18,000 apartments on that one street. So it's a little bit of an anecdotal example, but you can imagine how every apartment block comes with certain services and convenience stores. And you can look at the delivery drivers outside those apartment blocks, delivering from Tiki and others, and you can look at the Grab drivers waiting to pick up passengers, and you can see firsthand, of course, how urbanization changes all of our priorities and all of our behavior. Okay. Vietnam is now the most interconnected country globally. So what do I mean by that? If I take all the imports and all the exports and I divide it by GDP, I get an index. And then I can compare that index of international trade within Vietnam, or from Vietnam, in and out of Vietnam, with all the other countries in the world. And I can see that Vietnam is at 200%. The next closest country is our neighbor Thailand at 122. So that is how interconnected we are into a global supply system and a global economy. So if you look at a good example of seeing that would be one of Vietnam's largest exports is mobile phones. Do we make mobile phones from scratch? No, we don't. But we do import, courtesy of Samsung, a lot of components, put them together and re-export them. And it's businesses like that that help explain how interconnected the economy is. But it's a good thing for anyone who's dependent on the economy for their business. There are 14 trade agreements, for free trade agreements, that Vietnam has negotiated with other countries in the world. There are 6 more, including the European Trade Agreement, expected to come into finalization this year, within the 12 calendar months of this year. So Vietnam is also extraordinarily successful at negotiating its trade agreements to the benefit of the country and helping that international trade. I had a question there. Okay, who can tell me how much of the investment, inbound investment, so if you look at other countries investing into Vietnam, how much do you think comes from within Asia? So out of 100% of all the foreign investment that flows into Vietnam, how much do you think comes from within Vietnam, within Asia, sorry? Define Asia, including Japan and China, not including Australia. Southeast Asia, North Asia. What other definition? Is that good enough? Okay, very good. Just shout out a number. 90. 60%. 70%, 80%, okay. The man who asked me to define what Asia was wins. I believe the number from memory is 59%. 79%. God, I got it wrong. It wasn't you, Kerry. Who said 80? Rose, you win. Well done. So there's some interesting things there. If we look at the impact of global economies on Vietnam, first of all, most of our trade is within the region. Now, it hasn't always been that way. Most of our investment is coming out of Japan, particularly last year. These are last year's numbers, followed by Korea, followed by Singapore, Hong Kong, and China. China is probably understated because, much like the Vietnamese, the Chinese are good at hiding behind other country nationalities and entities and investing money through those. But however, it is coming from within Asia. The other big trend that's helping us is that 5 years ago, people on a stage like this would talk about manufacturing strategies that were China +1, and the +1 meant Vietnam. That's irrelevant today. A lot of companies are moving their manufacturing out of China and they're moving it into Vietnam. And there's a good reason for that. We're cheaper, and we also have better access to the US market. So we don't have the trade tensions that are going on between Mr. Trump and Mr. Xi at the moment. What we do have is far lower costs. So if I take the minimum wage in Saigon, which by the way is Vietnam's highest minimum wage because it varies by different zones, it's $181 equivalent. If I look at Guangzhou, it's $320. Now, in reality, both markets pay factory-level staff more than that. Otherwise, they struggle to hire them. But it's a great anecdotal indication of the cost of moving manufacturing. So Vietnam now is accounting for manufacturing in Vietnam is accounting for nearly half of all the foreign investment into the country. And that will continue. And that will be good in many ways in terms of growing the economic prosperity of our country. More women in Vietnam work anywhere else than women anywhere else in the region. So 88% of adult women work. Okay. If I look at India, that number from memory is around 12%. Could you imagine if all the women in India also started working? The potential for increasing productivity and national output would be massive. So we have also the highest working population at 58%. It's peaking at the moment. It's going to stay up at that level because of demographics. It's going to stay at that level for the next 7 or 8 years. Just back in 2004, it was only 50%. But that means we have a strong working population made all the lot much stronger by women, who, by the way, are far more intelligent than men, which means we have a low number of dependents per employed person. So if I have less dependent, that man and husband and wife earning money, less dependents to support, it gives them more discretionary income. Okay. And that really is a boost for productivity, and that is probably one of the key drivers. That, despite, I know most of my Vietnamese friends complain about the education system here, despite a very well-educated workforce, and this are the two biggest drivers of GDP growth. This explains why our GDP growth has been consistently between 6 and 7% over the last 12 years. If I look at small, medium enterprises in Vietnam, 40% of them are owned by women. You won't find that anywhere else in the region, possibly in China, nowhere else. Entrepreneurial spirit helps explain why last year we had 130,000 new businesses opened. The other thing that's rather unique to Vietnam is that most, and this is just an urban number, that most people in urban Vietnam have more than one source of income. So on average they have 1.7 sources of income, which means that as those of you who are foreign, you probably know that your colleagues don't just work at your company, but they also have their own family business or private business. And those of you who are Vietnamese, ask around, they can probably arrange some other service for you from another form of income. And all of these things, again, help propel our economy fantastically. Zhang talked about it, or Tung talked about it earlier, that Facebook is the second largest online platform. Yes, thousands of independent sellers on that platform, but it's an anecdotal example of the entrepreneurial spirit that helps drive the massive growth in our economy. There's a lot of tipping points that have been reached. In Vietnam, there are 23 million and 370-something thousand households. Okay. As of last year, 50% of them are now middle class and above. By my definition, and you know, the World Bank has a different definition, the Asian Development Bank has a different definition, and my definition is that they have more than $400 equivalent income, household income. And this is showing you the different levels of upper class, and it's this C, B, and A group. More than 50% of households now have the ability to spend money on discretionary items, i.e. they are a consuming class. And that is a tipping point that has been reached, and a lot of that has been fueled by the urban migration over the last 10 years, and increased prosperity, and increased opportunities for prosperity. Okay. Yeah, okay. Internet economy is shifting consumer priorities. So the internet economy now, $9 billion. And it enables all sorts of things. We've talked about many of them, right? It's causing fundamental shift in our lifestyles and our behaviors, how we get to work, whether we go to a coffee shop and sit on the plastic stool, or whether we go to work and somebody delivers our coffee to the office for us. It's democratizing access to goods and services that previously weren't available to us all. So it's making accessibility, for example, if I want to buy, I don't know, truffles, I can now buy truffles online in Vietnam relatively easily. I couldn't do that. I used to have to go to Ham Nhi if I wanted to buy anything particularly imported. Now I can almost access anything. Aggressive financing, so it's much easier to gain access to promotions, to discounts, to short-term loans. It's much easier for me as a consumer to say, okay, I'll buy that bike. I can't afford it, but yes, I'll pay for it over a period of time, or that mobile phone, or whatever item it may be. So, internet economy, $9 billion, which is the biggest category. Who can tell me of the internet economy what they think the biggest category in Vietnam is? So, for example, is it advertising? Is it media? Is it gaming? Is it travel? Is it shopping? What do you think the biggest category is? Gaming. Any others? Going once, going twice. Any others? Really? No one's going to make a guess? Shopping. Any others? Advertising. You're all wrong. I'm not giving anybody the prize. It's online travel. So online travel makes up the biggest chunk of that $9 billion. And then it's online shopping, then it's ads, media and games, and then it's ride-hailing at a small 6% today, but I'm sure that will change too. So that is the makeup of the internet economy, and of course that all of those aspects there have significant influence, if you like, on our purchase priorities and our behaviors, fundamentally shifting the way we go about our lives. Okay, anybody working in retail normally hates me for saying this, but I do believe that online shopping will surpass the modern trade in terms of its contribution to retail sales. I believe that the bloodbath that is going on in the modern trade, and in that I include malls, and in that I include Circle K's and Family Marts and others, they will not succeed and they will continue to burn money, and the ultimate winners will actually be the online shopping platforms. I believe that, as Zhang and Tung talked to you about, has reached a tipping point, and we are about to see an explosion in what people are willing to do online. Partly because of the availability of service, partly because of the infrastructure being stressed, and it's getting to the point where trust is there and people don't really need to leave their home, deal with the traffic, deal with the heat, deal with the pollution, if someone's going to willingly deliver it to their door so inexpensively. So online shopping will change the nature of the retail market. I don't think retail trade will develop like you see it in Singapore or you see it in Bangkok. I do believe traditional trade will continue to do rather well, and I suspect will end up being, there'll be networks of traditional trade outlets supporting the online businesses as collection points and delivery points as we go forward. The other big shift, and we talked about some of the constraints and how consumer spending moves towards experiences, well, the other big shift that helps support that also, that idea was, I don't need to save it now, buy it later. I can buy it now, and I can use that, do so using consumer finance. So just in 2016, consumer finance represented 9% of GDP. Last year, 15, it was 9%. Last year, it was 21% of GDP. So that's now sort of up at regional equilibrium, regional levels that you see elsewhere in Asia. 51 billion lent to consumers last year, or put it as another equivalent, 35% of retail sales as an equivalent number. So that's a huge amount of consumer finance. So there are a lot of people, I'm sure you know, a lot of your friends and colleagues who have loans, and that again changes the way people spend their money. We also have smaller household sizes. That changes purchase priorities. We also have people moving out of family home structures and moving into apartments, because isn't it wonderful? You get married, you no longer have to live with your mother-in-law. You can go and live in your own apartment. And financial services will even enable you to borrow the money to do so. But of course that changes your purchase priorities. You're in a smaller square meter footage. I think the average is 37 square meters. For the average apartment sold is 37 square meters. Small space, different purchase priorities. It also affects who's in your home and what you're sharing with other family members in the extended family and what you're buying. So over 4 years, just in 3 cities, 250,000 apartments have been sold, and it continues to grow. Other big issue that we see in change is that lower birth rate I talked about earlier on today. With a lower birth rate, much less pest to power. And pest to power was extraordinarily dominant in the way a mother shops. Just observe a mother shopping with a child, and you'll see it if you don't have your own child. And pest to power is declining, and it has been in the past a huge influence on a lot of consumer goods categories. The speed of change. So there's some of us in the room with grey hair like me who will remember the speed of change in China in the 80s. And it was phenomenal if you were from any other market. You found it hard to comprehend. Vietnam now is very similar. So what we see in Vietnam is a society that just leapfrogs certain stages of development. So let me think of some examples. Put your hand up if you have a fixed line telephone at home. A telephone that you plug into the wall. 1, 2, maybe 3 with a photograph. 4. 4 people have a fixed line telephone at home. Most households have jumped the idea of having a fixed line telephone. So they don't need one. They've jumped straight to data. Put your hand up if you mostly call people on your phone network or on your data network, i.e. on WhatsApp or Viber or Zalo. So maybe half. I mean, half the calls I get now are from people calling me on WhatsApp or Zalo, not calling me through the actual voice network, but through the data network. I assume those half expect me to buy lunch, and because they can't afford the phone bill. We're seeing that move from, I believe, traditional to online shopping, where the whole development of the modern trade that we see in other markets will be leapfrogged in quite dramatic form. Shared rides. So we're all quite happy to hail. Put your hand up if you've used Grab or GoViet in the last 24 hours, right? So own a car, hail a car. Park my car, hail a car. Pay for my car, pay for the trip. So, it's going to be a challenge for the car manufacturers to expect consumers to have the desire, as older generations have, had to own a more expensive vehicle or a car. And design of cars has often been around the driver and the driving experience. Well, increasingly it's going to be around the passenger and the passenger's experience, because the person paying for the ride will not be the driver. Fresh. So I kind of skipped over it this morning, but there is a huge shift because of the lack of trust in food and beverage in the country today, to people claiming provenance, talking about traceability, talking about origin. Mok chol would be an example. The milk clearly comes from Mok chol. The lat would be an example. Vinmart, with their Vineco range of vegetables, is saying, look, we farm it, we control the process, we bring it to the Vinmart Plus store, it's safe, right? Fresh produce, we'll probably never see, as in my home country or as in the US, the development of industrialized processed food at the same scale, because it won't be necessary, and the idea of provenance and origin will stay strong. The picture on the wall is a nut milk. Now, if you've ever been to the US, nut milks will be quite normal for you, and they're actually not dairy. They're normally an almond milk or maybe an oat milk, and there's some famous case studies around different brands in that area. But actually here in Vietnam, this is just almond flavoring in a dairy product. It's not actually an almond milk. However, it took for almond milks to get on the shelf in a US supermarket, it took years of a vegetarian movement, of a vegan movement, to have oat milk, to have almond milk, maybe 20, 30 years of development. Vietnam, we've just leapfrogged that whole development, and straight away already we have nut milks coming onto the market. So moving from milk to not milk, although strictly this does have dairy. Maybe that will change, maybe it won't. So we're seeing a lot of movement. We're not going to see, unfortunately for Visa, we're not going to see the evolution of credit cards like we have in the US. We're going to see a movement straight to, well, depending on Bin's presentation, which of those scenarios comes true, but in my belief, straight to mobile banking apps and far less use of credit cards and debit cards and the evolution of those. So, this is a wrap-up. The constraints are on the left. I won't repeat all the opportunities that are being evolved on the right and the drivers of the opportunity that Vietnam's economy makes.